Hi everyone. It's a pleasure having today Dr. Benzel with us. So Dr. Benzel, I don't think that he needs a very long introduction. He's very well known, but at the moment he's the Emeritus Chairman of Neurosurgery at the Cleveland Clinic and also Professor of Neurological Surgery. He is the current Editor-in-Chief of the World Neurosurgery, and he's also one of the founding members of the Lumbar Spine Research Society. He has a wide range of clinical and research interests, but mainly focused on spinal disorders. And I think what he's very well known of is his commitment to education. He's very well known as an educator, and he also initiated and directed the neurosurgery residency training program at the University of New Mexico, and then also played a major role in the program at the Cleveland Clinic. Today the webinar is focusing on research. So we have also with us my co-chair in the WFNS Young Neurosurgeons Committee, Ignatius Esene. So Ignatius is a consultant neurosurgeon currently based at the University of Barbenda in Cameroon, and he also has received subspecialty training in skull base and neurovascular at the University of Wisconsin. He has a very keen interest in research methodology, so it's a pleasure actually having him talk to us today. So without further ado, I would like to ask Dr. Benzel to start, and then Ignatius is going to also show a few slides, and then we can have a discussion in the end, if that's okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Angelo, for that kind introduction. Today, I'm going to spend 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little more or less, talking about research, but I'm going to focus, you're going to see a little bit inside of me and what makes me tick and how I view World Neurosurgery as a journal and its ability to contribute to the good of the world, essentially. Many of these slides were prepared by Ignatius, and I did not change them too much. Faith has written a great paper on resources for young neurosurgeons worldwide, and found out that, among many other things, that lower income countries find that as one of their most challenging problems, the ability to do and perform and publish research. Where do people in resource challenged areas of the world get their information? Well, open access journals like World Neurosurgery X is a source. Unfortunately, many journals do not have a significant open access component. European journals tend to have more because the movement for open access really began in the academic communities in Europe. And obviously, people who publish in WNSX and other open access journals need to foot the bill for the publication. And so it costs money to publish there. Other sources include libraries. World Neurosurgery, as do almost all other journals, achieve most of their funding and financial resources from libraries. So a library may have a contract with Elsevier, who's the publishing company that publishes World Neurosurgery, and it's a global contract. So if people have access to a library, they probably, of any substance, they probably have access to some electronic media. In World Neurosurgery, we have a couple of forums which may be of utility to people who are trying to meander through the abyss of getting research done and publishing it. One is a new forum, the Early Career Forum, which allows people like all of you here who are early in their training or in the midst of training to have access to a voice, to communicate with each other, write papers, and then respond with letters to the editor, etc. A second One is doing more with less. And I'm going to address both of these, but several others. And here we dive a little bit into the opportunities that I have, and essentially me alone have in the publishing world, in that Elsevier gives me a tremendous amount of leeway to create new venues, such as early career forum, or doing more with less. And I will, whereas other journals are sort of needing to follow the rules and regulations of the organization, like Journal of Neurosurgery with WFNS, Neurosurgery with CNS. But Early Career Forum allows us to, is an opportunity for young neurosurgeons to submit, this includes residents, fellows, and graduates, early graduates. It provides a forum to explore important issues specific to those training in early years of practice. It is, the authors must be maximum of 3, and either residents, fellows, or within 5 years of graduation. The word limit is 1,500, and there's figures and tables are limited to 2 per submission. There's instructions here on where to submit them, but that can also be found on in the front matter of the journal. Doing more with less, and both of these, some of you may know or know of Peter Nakaji. He and I worked together in the journal early on, early in my tenure, and we said, wouldn't it be great if we could have a special section that was devoted to people being creative in resource-challenged areas of the world, and to share the things they learned with other people. And so we created this section, Doing More with Less. The Early Career Forum came to me with 2 of our spine fellows who said, wouldn't it be great if we could do the same thing with, provide an outlet for people early in their career. And so this is the kind of latitude that I have. And at the end of the talk here, I'm going to talk about a couple of more opportunities that may be looming in the future. At any rate, doing more with less is an opportunity for neurosurgeons in resource-challenged areas of the world to focus on a particular need. It solicits submissions of new articles, commentaries, and scientific technical papers that relate to issues surrounding optimal patient care. In particular, it calls for scientific and technical papers that focus on methods for accomplishing neurosurgical goals with low-cost solutions. Please choose Doing More with Less. Choose the section, the appropriate section, if you submit an article. This is an article by Jaw, and on Doing More with Less, where he developed frugal, malleable microdissectors and arachnoid knives for microneurosurgery. He couldn't afford the expensive ones from the company, so he took sheet metal, used tin snips, and then pounded various shapes and sharpened them, etc. There's a sharpening tool to make arachnoid knives, dissecting knives, hooks, etc., to facilitate his surgical operations. Now, first of all, this is brilliant. Second of all, it is very insightful, and he took this to another level. So we have Doing More with Less, Early Career Forum, but we also have sections on history. Maybe an article on the history of neurosurgery in your country, or the history of a famous neurosurgical character in your country might be good. Socioeconomics. We tend to think in the United States of socioeconomics as pertaining to upper echelon economic countries, but socioeconomic issues are issues for everybody. And then we have new sections on neurogenesis and molecular biology. And I would encourage you, if you are an artist or a photographer, both of them are artists, we accept many submissions for potential use on the cover of World Neurosurgery or for filler art within the journal. This is an interesting paper that was written by Esene et al. And it was a superb paper, and it elicited a significant response in our perspective component. We also have perspectives. So if somebody says to me, this is a great paper, I want to comment on it, I say, okay, let's have you comment, and then these are the reviewers, and then I have the other reviewers comment as well. Well, in this paper, Esene et al. Compared, looked at manuscripts and found that a significant number of manuscripts are mislabeled between cohort studies and case control study. A cohort study, this is from the manuscript, is a research design in which patients are sampled on the basis of exposure or intervention and are followed over time, and the occurrence of outcomes, for example, complications and recurrence, are assessed. A case control study is a research design in which participants are selected on the basis of whether they do such a case or do not do such a case, which would be the controls, and have a particular disease or outcome under the study. Cases and controls are then compared with respect to existing or past exposures. They are often, and as pointed out by Esene et al., often mislabeled. The consequences of this, it impairs appropriate indexing, classification, and sorting of evidence, but it also leads to a downgrading of evidence because cohort studies represent the highest level of evidence. And so we're mixing and matching and causing a confusion. This is where we have a problem. Esene et al. Says we need a multi-pronged solution to this. Become familiar with the definition of case control studies and implications of misclassification. That goes without saying. That is the responsibility of the author. And they also suggest that manuscripts submitted to neurosurgery journals be reviewed by an epidemiologist and exposure of the rigors of Strobe guideline adherence. Here's the problem. With World Neurosurgery, the people who actually are at the center of the business of World Neurosurgery are myself and an assistant, Christine Moore. The rest of it is completely automated except for the reviewers and section editors. We don't have access to epidemiologists. We can't afford to pay an epidemiologist to review all these manuscripts. And so the problem becomes substantial. Here's another example of the problem associated with not having enough person power. One of the reviewers, when I mentioned to him that we needed more information from him, he said, just some thoughts. Maybe reviewers need some sort of incentive for completing timely reviews and participating, like a certificate after doing a review. 50 reviews or get a star, and the recognition by yourself and World Neurosurgery could also connect them to Publons, a third-party platform which lets reviewers get their reviews validated and gives them certificates. Well, that's all fine, except the operationalization of this becomes very difficult. Regardless, let's get back to Esene's paper. Two of the three perspectives were great. They just amplified and gave accolades to the authors of the original paper. But Tomasello and Conti employed the term epistemology, which I said I had to admit had never heard of before, and I looked it up, and it's basically the study of knowledge. They talked about three epistemologic factors that contribute to knowledge, and they are truth, belief, and justification. Knowledge itself can be defined as justified true belief. Epistemologic research is a tool that serves to optimize health resources and through the application of scientific discovery. A scientific journal must, however, favor epistemologic aspect, ensuring that good research reaches its audience. An overly selective approach actually risks leaving potentially important results out of the scientific literature. They go on to say that Esene et al. Were being elitist. Ignatius, that's not a criticism of you. I think, I said perhaps a bit harsh. While the populist approach, which is at the other extreme, allows for publication of less censored material at the expense of misclassification. They almost take a socialistic political approach to this. They suggest that democratic journals allow for dialogue in the form of letters to the editor and perspectives, such as what is provided here in this letter. So this, number one, this was an interesting dialogue. Number two, it was enlightening, and it's the kind of thing that stimulates communication. And this is the type of thing we try to foster. I would like to, for the next couple of minutes, take a different approach and look at studies and maybe another angle on studies that we need to get more control on. And this article by David Casseret in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2016, titled The Therapeutic Illusion, looked at the therapeutic illusion. The outcome of virtually all medical decisions is at least partially outside the physician's control, and random chance can encourage physicians to embrace mistaken beliefs. And he also introduced the term confirmation bias. Once a treatment is underway, physicians and patients tend to look for evidence that is having some kind of positive effect. So we basically, in clinical trials, look at two types of research. One is conclusion-based research, which is hypothesis-driven, and process-based research, which we could define as exploratory inquiry. And conclusion-based research, hypothesis-driven research, leads to the therapeutic illusion, which leads to confirmation bias. Let's drill down on this just a bit more. Conclusion-based research uses frequentist probability and basically encourages therapeutic illusion, where the authors and the researchers are trying to prove a point. So it is heavily bias laden. Whereas process-based research uses Bayesian probability, and although bias occurs, it is agnostic. The biases can go both ways, not only in one direction. So there's many publications now and increasingly showing that prior research has and the conclusions has subsequently been shown to be false. The truth wears off. And many of you may know about, and if you haven't, it's worthwhile to read this article by Scott. And it discusses ideas, research that's positive, confirmatory studies, widespread use of a technique, and then others say, wait a second, it's not as good as we thought. Problems occur and it falls off. The trouble is, in the area under this curve could be many harmed patients. And so we need to get a better handle on bias in research, particularly in clinical and particularly in surgical trials. Scientific pursuits, we must have to be innovative. If you're going to write a paper, you're going to come up with something, you have to think out of the box a little bit. So you start off with an idea. This is for industry essentially, but let's apply it to clinical publications. Then you need to do entrepreneurism, and that is research to substantiate your idea. And then you need to promote it in some sort of commercialistic way. Louis Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind. I'm sure some of you know who this is. This is Alexander Fleming. and he had a prepared mind. He noted in his Petri dish that was basically a botched experiment, that outside of this fungal collection, there were no bacteria. And he actually coined the term penicillin, which that fungus was secreting. He didn't do anything with it. It took these other two fellows, Howard Florey and Ernest Boris Chain, to do more research, to develop the technology, and then mass produce penicillin in the middle of World War II, which saved countless lives during the war, and for which all three of them received a Nobel Prize in medicine in 1945. Sidney and Ignatius basically have a conclusion that they provided for me, and that the return to normalcy after COVID is going to be a new normalcy, one in which some things that were considered impossible before will no longer become impossible. That's like using this. Now we can communicate effectively worldwide. Resilience is another factor that is most certainly going to be a characteristic that has been nurtured. And we cannot let the current crisis stifle us. For life goes on, and their commentary and part of their title is, when life gives you a lemon, make lemonade. So this is a great article and a strong and powerful message. So 3 more slides. Global neurosurgery is the title of this slide, but it came out of a discussion between Russell Andrews, which probably many of you know or have heard of, who's very involved with the WFNS, was just talking to me about global neurosurgery, and he sent this email to me. A quick PubMed research, a search of global neurosurgery in the title and abstract today yields 75 articles, only 7 prior to 2017 and 15, and only 5 in 2017. So the vast majority are from 2018 to 2020. Nearly half in the World Neurosurgery, our journal we're discussing today, and most of the rest in USA journals: Journal of Neurosurgery, Journal of Neurosurgery Spine, Journal of Neurosurgery Pediatric, Neurosurgical Focus, and Neurosurgery. Only 3 in ACTA, and 1 in 2019 and 2 in 2020. Take-home message: global neurosurgery is a very recent vernacular that does not reflect the long history of neurosurgeons interacting across borders, and primarily a US-based term. Having said that, we said, let's start another section called Global Neurosurgery. And Russell Andrews is going to write the first article, and we'll probably have every other month or quarterly articles written by people who are well entrenched in global neurosurgery. And although I haven't asked him, I probably would ask people like Robert Dempsey from the University of Wisconsin to contribute. Then another issue that is a venue that is rapidly emerging in the United States through our Accreditation Council of Graduate Medical Education, are us, the people who train neurosurgeons in the United States, to embed quality improvement and patient safety in the residency training. And so in order to do that, residents must write papers, and they could be published in World Neurosurgery. And so look for this section coming up soon. And finally, case reports are going to fade away in World Neurosurgery. Beginning August 1st, all case reports will be transferred to INAT, which is a sister journal that is predominantly a case report journal. As you probably know, impact surgery is inflicted because of the types of papers it accepts, but over 30% of our manuscripts are case reports, and they are notoriously low and are an excessive burden. This year we are on track to review 10,000 papers. That becomes a formidable task for our team, and we're going to try to lessen that. So I thank you. We're in difficult times, and Machiavelli's note here is particularly relevant to these times. There is nothing more difficult to plan, more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to manage than the creation of a new order of things. I thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Benzel. This was a very nice talk and very insightful as well. Shall we try and take maybe some questions now? If anybody has a burning question, maybe if they put it on the chat, and then I can ask the question on your behalf. Yeah. Ignatius, is there anything you would like to add?
No, Professor Korachi has his hand raised, the chair of the accounts. He wants to ask a question.
I'm sorry, who?
Professor Korachi, Mahmoud Korachi.
Ah, Moody, okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can do something about it. Okay. Faith, can you just...
You can put it in a chat.
Yeah, just have her put it in the chat. I
Okay.
don't see her on the list.
So the audience can't...
We have to understand.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, question and answer. So it will be recorded.
Faith?
Yes.
Yeah, I need to see the screen. Yeah.
You can share your screen, right?
Okay, all right.
You want me to get off?
So yeah, Dr. Benzel, hit stop sharing at the bottom.
Got it.
And then Ignatius, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Faith, for the good organization. Thank you, Angelus, for your leadership skills. I'm so much abashed and really overwhelmed by the presence of Professor Benzel at this webinar organized by the WFNS Young Neurosurgeon Forum in collaboration with the Young African Neurosurgeons. This afternoon, we'll be talking about the challenges faced by neurosurgeons in conducting research. In the recent months, neurosurgery has been hard hit by COVID-19. And before I proceed with my presentation, I'd like us to observe a minute of silence for all the fallen heroes. May their soul rest in perfect peace. So talking about COVID-19 brings into mind the recent letter which we just published. COVID-19 has brought to the knees many neurosurgical systems, even the most resilient ones in Africa and worldwide. And this presents an opportunity for us to be able to readapt and adopt new strategies for neurosurgical education and training. But to do so, I've always said we need to adopt an evidence-based approach. Neurosurgical evidence, the neurosurgical decision-making should be guided by evidence, and neurosurgical health policy should be guided by evidence. To do that, we conducted a survey to know the needs of young neurosurgeons, which Professor Benzel already talked about. And we found out that about 61% of neurosurgeons in low-income countries identify research as a priority for them, contrary to 35% in high-income countries. This was 70% in Africa. And in addition to lack of...
Ignatius, some people are saying they can't see your screen.
Right, I can see it okay. Can you guys see the screen okay? I see like the bar graph right now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying research is a priority for young neurosurgeons globally, and particularly in low-income countries. And in addition to that, as Professor Benzel said before, young neurosurgeons also identify having difficulties in having access to neurosurgical journals and research facilities. If we look back into time, 10 years ago, we saw that about 80% of the research output came from North America and Europe. And the situation hasn't changed up till now. This is a recent paper which we just submitted. The situation actually didn't change. Most of the research is still coming from high-income countries. So there's a gap between the high-income countries and the low-income countries. We need to close this gap. This is occurring because if you look at what is happening in industrialized countries and low-income countries, in industrialized countries, we have what we call the ideal neurosurgeon. A neurosurgeon in high-income country does not only participate in patient care, but he's involved in education and training and research. Okay, when we go to low-income countries, because of the high patient volume, neurosurgeons spend their time treating patients and have little or no time for research and education. But whatever the scenario, in 2015, we realized that there are some problems related to the quality of research, be it in high or low income countries. But in addition, in low income countries, there's a problem of quantity. So there's a very low research output from low income countries. Today, we are going to address the problem related to the quality of research. And next week, during the webinar of the WFNS Global Neurosurgery Committee, we are going to address the problem related to the quantity of research. So because this is an educational course, there are a number of things that the young neurosurgeon should remember at the end of this presentation. He should be able to understand a simple approach to clinical research designs in neurosurgery. He should know the anatomy and physiology of study designs relevant in neurosurgery. He should be able to link study design and the statistics, and should be able to apply research evidence onto patient care through the process of evidence-based neurosurgery. And lastly, they should be able to understand some of the challenges faced when conducting and publishing studies. So to do that, we conducted a scoping review. I'm not going to go into the methodology now, but these are the findings. There are problems related to the methodology or the methodology quality. There are problems related to the reporting quality. There are problems related to the misclassification of study designs. Problems related to the sample size inconsistency. There's downgrading of evidence. Definitely, we cannot address all these problems today. I'm just going to talk about the major ones. And to begin with, I'm going to use an approach which is called a problem solution approach. So I'm going to name a problem and provide and put up a solution which we've listed. So the first problem we found out was that there are many confusing approaches to study designs in neurosurgical literature. And the solution we provided was that we developed an algorithm for the structural and functional unit, functional approach to research in neurosurgery. But unfortunately, about a year ago, a paper was published in JNS. And this paper, there was a lot of flaws. The authors talked about analytic comparative study. This is not appropriate because an analytic study is a study that already has a comparison group, so this is some sort of tautology. They talked about case series as the only descriptive study. This is not correct. You have the case report, you have the descriptive cohort studies, and the uncontrolled intervention study. They also made mention of the word longitudinal study and retrospective case control and prospective cohort study. This is also not very appropriate because a case control study or a cohort study can be prospective or retrospective. And here there's another confusing terminology which I found in their paper where they talked about prospective cohort non-randomized control trial. I've never heard about that, so it's some sort of confusing. So this was our own algorithm which we published in 2016, okay, and was updated just last month in a book published by the Ethics Committee of the World Federation. Here, our approach is very simple. There are 5 questions you need to ask. Each time you want to conduct research, you need to ask the first thing, what is the aim? What do I want to achieve? If you just want to summarize existing evidence, okay, then you are talking about secondary research. But if you want to get new data, okay, then you are talking about primary research. The next question you ask yourself is there a comparison group? If there is no comparison group, then we are talking about descriptive studies. If there's a comparison group, we're talking about analytic studies. When you go to descriptive studies, you ask, what is the unit of analysis? Are we dealing with aggregate data or time series? They were talking about ecological studies. If I look at the individuals, okay, they can be case report, case series, or descriptive cohort study. When you go to analytic study, that study is having a comparison group. You ask yourself, is the investigator allocating the exposure or the intervention in the case of surgery? If no, then we're talking about observational analytic studies. If yes, we're talking about interventional studies. So for observational analytic studies, depending on the relationship between exposure and the outcome, it can be a cross-sectional study, it can be a case control study if I'm moving from exposure to the outcome, or a cohort study if I'm moving from the exposure to the disease. So having understood this simple algorithm at looking at study designs in neurosurgery, we're going to look at the serious problem which has been existing for a very long time. That is the definition of the case report. If you look at the literature, we know that in the neurosciences, the neuron is a basic structural and functional unit of research. We conducted a study in 2014 where we looked at the top 13 neurosurgical journals and looked at the case reports published in these journals. And we realized that 15% of them were actually misclassified. For example, look at the table. You see a study labeled as a case report having a sample size of 11, another study labeled as a case series with a sample size of 4. Naturally, the sample size of a case series should be greater than that of a case report. So you see some of these confusing papers published. And this problem has been existing for many centuries. So we thought of providing a solution to this problem. The solution was based on knowledge of statistics. You know, this is the generic formula for the confidence interval. You know, when you conduct research, the confidence interval of the sample, okay, is equal to the point estimate and what we call the margin of error. This might sound somehow complicated for the non-statistician, but however, in simple terms, it means the confidence interval is equal to the point estimate times the margin of error. The confidence interval is related to the standard error, and the standard error is related to the sample size. So based on our knowledge of statistics and mathematics, there's something we call the transitive law of mathematical logic, which says if A is related to B and B is related to C, then therefore A is related to C. So if we know that the confidence interval is directly proportional to the standard error, and the standard error is inversely proportional to the sample size, therefore the confidence interval should be inversely proportional to the standard to the sample size. So we developed a hypothetical sample of 10 patients and plotted the sample size, the standard error to the sample size, and then took gradients across the curve. We realized that at 5, there was a marked change in the gradient, which means that at the sample size less than 5, the confidence interval increased. There was an increase in the standard error. And you know, as the standard error increases, the confidence interval increases, which means the confidence interval becomes very wide. And in research, we don't want to have wide confidence interval. We want data that is very precise. So based on this, we published our paper in World Neurosurgery, and that the maximum sample size for a case report should be 5 subjects. Above 5, you have to look for other studies. It might be a case series, it might be a cohort study. And fortunately for us, we've been lobbying with some journals, and it is not as it is now in the instruction to authors in the Journal of Neurosurgery. So for you to be able to publish a case series in a case report in the Journal of Neurosurgery, the sample size should be between 1 to 5. Having a look at the definition of the case report, what we added new was the fact that the sample size should be below or equal to 5. There's nothing new here. This paper was published in the 1980s, where a case report can be something which is abnormal, and unusual finding during a surgical procedure can be an exceptional or a creative approach. And sometimes in journals, you see case report being published as adverse side effects, later to the editors, how I do it, case studies. So this is what a new definition of the case report is. And to write a good case report, there are some number of guidelines which have already been developed. Okay, you have the CARE guidelines, case reporting guidelines. So for you to be able to publish a case report in a very reputable journal, you need to be able to use these guidelines in writing your paper. Having looked at the definition of the case report, we move forward to look at the definition of the case series. Again, there's a problem with case series. If you look into PubMed, there's no merge term for case series, surprisingly, which means it's a neglected study design. And again, we evaluated the top 13 neurosurgical journals over a period of about 70 years, and we realized that only 30% of the studies published as case series are actually true case series. 70% of them are a misclassification, and 55% are actually what we call descriptive cohort studies. So we actually introduced the word descriptive cohort into the neurosurgical lexicology. This paper was published as a cover editorial in the Child Nervous System. And to understand the definition of the word case series, you need to understand what a cohort is. The meaning of the word cohort is rooted in the Latin word cohort, which was in the Roman times was an infantry in the military, okay? A group of military men that take off from a particular point and head into a particular destination. In epidemiology, okay, a cohort is a group of people with something in common, usually an exposure, okay, or involvement in a defined population group. Having understood the definition of the word cohort, a case also is rooted, the meaning of the word case is rooted in the Latin word casus, which means a happening, an event, or an occurrence, okay? But sometimes linguistically, we just talk about a case to be any patient that comes to the hospital or a patient. But strictly speaking, a case is the disease or the clinical phenomenon in question. And to better understand the meaning of the word case, you have to look at this decision matrix or the epidemiologic classes or the 2x2 table. When you conduct research, especially when it's an analytic study, you talk about the exposed and the non-exposed, and you have the outcome and patients without the outcome. Sometimes we use the word case and the controls, okay? You have the disease and the non-disease. So actually, in a case series, we're looking in the vertical direction, whereas in the cohort study, we're looking in the horizontal direction. So if you understand the meaning of the word exposure or intervention for the surgeons and disease or outcome for, then you can better understand the meaning of the word case series. And so in our paper, we wrote about 2 types of case series. There's what we call epidemiologic case series. For example, if you take, say, 5 cases of COVID-19, that's going to be a case report. But as the cases increase, say to 8, this becomes a case series. So we have a number of patients that develop a certain phenomenon over a short period of time. This is what we call the epidemiologic case series. But what is most interesting to me is the surgical case series. The surgical case series is a study design in which sampling is from outcome to exposure. Okay, so for example, if you go to a neuro-oncologic unit, you look at patients operated for suprasellar meningioma, okay, and then you pick out those having tumor occurrence. You can then look back into them and see what surgical approach they had for their surgery. Was it an endoscopic approach, transnasal or transcranial approach? So this is the methodology of a case series. This is not a cohort study. A cohort study, you're starting from the intervention. Okay, patients are exposed to a certain procedure, and then you follow them up over time to see what happens to them. You see the outcome. For case series, you start from the outcome and look back into time to look at the intervention with the patients they had. Again, from the statistical point of view, there is a difference between the cohort study and the case series. In cohort studies, we're able to measure what we call the risk. For example, the incidence, the complication rate, the recurrence. With the case series, we cannot measure the risk. Okay, I know linguistically we use the word odds and probability interchangeably, but they are different. Imagine a scenario where you have 12 patients, okay, and 3 of them have a complication. We say the probability or the risk of having a complication is going to be 3 on 12, which gives us 25%, okay? But if you look at the odds is going to be 3 on 9, not 3 on 12, which is 30%. So when you misclassify a case series for a cohort study or vice versa, then you see you're already biasing the statistics. And with the advent of meta-analysis, if you have to pull this data together, you're going to have a wrong summary. So this is a paper which we submitted sometime in 2014, and we had a problem with the reviewer because he was insisting that we change our methodology from being a prospective descriptive cohort study to a case series. I had to write to the editor-in-chief and explain to him what we're talking about. So therefore, reviewers need to understand what these study designs are all about to be able to review appropriately. This is an example of a descriptive cohort study which we published from Africa. It's the first multi-center prospective study done in the continent, and it was done by young neurosurgeons under the supervision of Professor Kasadi Kalago. And here, we actually had very good outcome, an infection rate for shunt, VP shunt of less than 2%, which is far less than the global value. And to be able to write a good case series, there are some guidelines that were developed recently called the process guidelines. For you to be able to publish a good case series in most good journals, now you need to be able to apply these guidelines. Similarly, if you want to write a good cohort study, you need to use the STRAP guidelines. So you can go to the website and read more about these guidelines. Having talked about the descriptive study, we're going to move to observational studies. We looked at the literature. Many neurosurgeons understand what a cross-sectional study is, so there's no problem about that. What about the cohort studies? They too still understand about the cohort study. There are very little problems about the cohort studies in neurosurgery. But the problem is with the case control study. If you look on this slide, you have 9 studies. Okay, between 2014 to now, we have 9 studies have been published in neurosurgery looking at the case control study. Okay, and ours, which was the most extensive, looking at the top 30 neurosurgical journals over a period of close to 100 years, we're able to demonstrate that 40% of studies published as case control studies are in this classification. And we therefore concluded in a strong term that not every control study is a case control study. Professor Benzel mentioned this in his talk, so I'm not going to go more into that. But this study drew a lot of attention worldwide. We have Negayo and Spatula who wrote, and they were in support of our recommendations. However, we had Francisco Tomasello from Italy who actually criticized our approach and said we're trying to create some sort of elitism in neurosurgery. Professor Benzel wrote an editorial on this, and And with in the past few years now, we are seeing this a gradual increase or gradual improvement in case control studies published, in particularly in the world in neurosurgery. So, just like for the case series, to understand what the case control study is all about, the case control study, we are comparing the cases and the controls. We are comparing the cases and the controls, because comparing the disease and the non-disease, we are comparing patients having the outcome in question and those without the outcome. We're not comparing the exposed and the non-exposed. That is the methodology of a cohort study. We're not comparing those having the standard approach to the new approach. That is the methodology of a cohort study. So again, to understand these terminologies, you need to understand this table, which I've put here. So to illustrate what a case control study is, for example, if you go to a spine unit, okay, you find patients who are operated for a lumbar disc herniation. You pick out those that have CSF leak from a dural tear, and then also select, you also match it with those without a CSF leak. These are the controls. They can look back into them and see if they were operated through the microscopic surgery or through endoscopic surgery. So this is the methodology of a case control study. By looking back from the outcome, those patients having the outcome, the cases, comparing them to those without the outcome, and then looking back into them to look at the intervention which they had. And a case control study is different from the analytic cohort study. Again, from the statistical point of view, classically with the cohort study, we're able to calculate the relative risk. With the case control study, we calculate the odds ratio. It's true that maybe with the cohort study, if you are doing, for example, multivariate analysis with logistic regression, you can have the odds ratio. But classically, the effect size we measure with the cohort study is the relative risk. Again, if you look at the evidence-based hierarchy, the cohort study is placed higher than the case control study. So therefore, if you misclassify a case control study, a cohort study for a case control study, you are downgrading the evidence. What has been happening over time? If you notice that around 2008, there was a change that occurred. There was introduction of the STROP guidelines for the, which are a checklist for reporting observational studies. You notice that there was a decrease in the number of misclassified cases, okay, and an increase in the number of correctly classified cases. So this is evidence to show that if we apply these guidelines, if we insist that researchers should use these guidelines in reporting their papers, there's going to be improvement in the case control studies published in literature. The problem with case control studies ubiquitous is not particularly related to any particular continent. As you can see, most of the cases came from North America and Europe. Well, this is because they are also publishing more case control studies. And spine surgeons, I'm sorry to say this, Professor Benzel, they are doing very poorly when it comes to case control studies. They write very bad case control studies, and spine surgeons need to be actually trained writing appropriate case control studies. So these are some of the terminologies you find in the literature: prospective cross-sectional case control study, prospective double-blinded randomized case control. These are all misnomers. I mean, they make no sense. It makes things very confusing. So to be able to write a good case control study, I already talked about the STROP guidelines. If you apply the STROP guidelines, at least you're able to write appropriate case control studies. So having talked about the observational studies, we're going to move to the surgical trials. The surgical trial, of course, is the gold standard, okay, for decision making in medicine, but they are the most controversial study design in neurosurgery, okay. Although secular trends have shown that we are actually improving the quality of surgical trials over time, the quality remains very low. And about 50% of the surgical trials published are of bad to moderate quality. So you can imagine what it means, about 50%. Some can actually be misleading. We've written extensively on this, the challenges of publishing a surgical trial. Although it's a gold standard, sometimes the diseases are very rare. You need to follow up the patients for a very long time. Patients would hardly accept. There is expertise bias, where, for example, if you have to compare the endoscope to the microscope, the surgeon maybe has more experience in the endoscope than the microscope. So it makes it difficult to be able to do good RCTs in neurosurgery and surgery in general. So again, we are not reinventing the wheel. There are already guidelines available to be able to write and publish a good RCT. What about secondary research designs? This is a slide I borrowed from my friend who is actually a research methodologist in Canada. People think that reviews are just of two types, maybe the traditional reviews and meta-analysis. No, this is a wide spectrum of reviews, starting from the traditional reviews via scoping reviews, systematic reviews, Cochrane reviews, to meta-analysis. And quite recently, we have what we call the overviews. Overviews are systematic reviews of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. You need to know these study designs. We are going to talk about this in our subsequent webinars, but I just wanted to give an overview of what is actually going on. So again, you look at meta-analysis. Up to 30% of meta-analysis published in neurosurgery do not even meet the basic definition of a meta-analysis. They have nothing to do with what we call a meta-analysis. They are just a collection of case series and case reports that have been pulled together statistically using tests which are not, some of them not often correct, to provide results. That's why you need to be very meticulous when you're looking at the results of a meta-analysis. And again, neurosurgeons are some sort of very self-confident people. And if you compare the meta-analysis in neurosurgery to those in other specialties, neurosurgeons are doing very poorly compared to the other surgical fields. So we need to actually improve. But what is actually a meta-analysis? When the concept of the meta-analysis was developed, it wasn't meant to be able, it wasn't meant to pull studies together, have a value and say this, to have a summary value. It was for us to have to see the trends of what is happening when there's inconsistency or when there's the discrepancies. So for example, consider a plane leaving an airport. At the beginning, we are able to see the airport with precision and distinction. But when the plane rises into the air, okay, you lose the precision. What you see is the pattern. And this is the idea about the meta-analysis. When you have, for example, 10 studies talk about endoscopic versus microscopic pituitary surgery, you need to be able to put them together and see what is the direction, which technique is better than the other. It's not to be able to pull and say one has 80% resection rate and the other has 50% resection rate. This is not the idea. It's just for us to see the pattern. So I promise to tell you about the relationship between the study design and the statistics. This is very important because sometimes in my free time, I do a bit of statistics. And you notice that people, after collecting the data, they come to you and ask you to do statistics. It becomes difficult to do a lot of things because sometimes the data is not corrected appropriately. For example, the person collects age range, okay? Say age range, say 5 to 10, 10 to 15 or whatever, and not the numerical values. It becomes difficult to calculate some basic statistics like the mean, the median, and the mode. So these need to be planned. So you need to have some idea of what you need to measure at the end of your study. Classically, with ecological studies, we measure the frequencies. With case series, we get the odds. Descriptive cohort studies, we get the probabilities, the risk, the incidence. With the cross-sectional studies, we're able to calculate the prevalences. Case control, typically we get the odds ratios. With the cohort and the ROCTs, we're able to calculate the relative risk. And as I say again, it's possible in ROCTs when you're doing multivariate analysis to get the odds ratio. And I also promised to make you understand the relationship between the study design and evidence-based neurosurgery, because when you conduct research, it's not just the conduct of the study that's important. You need to be able to translate the findings of this research into patient care. If it is not going to change patient care, then it is of no use. So therefore, every neurosurgeon needs to understand the relationship between the study design and evidence-based neurosurgery. And as you know, evidence-based neurosurgery is just the integration of the best research evidence available at that particular point in time, the surgical expertise, experience, and judgment, okay, the patient value and preferences for optimal care of the patient. Okay, and if you look at the algorithm which we developed in 2016, when you move from the left to the right, okay, you said it corresponds to the hierarchy of evidence in the evidence-based hierarchy. So the studies on the left are going to be at the bottom, and those on the right are going to be at the top. Okay, we'll talk about this in the webinar, which we're going to talk about evidence-based in neurosurgery. And from the level of evidence, we're able to come up with the recommendations. I think most neurosurgeons are very familiar with this table. So I'm going to illustrate the consequences of bad research in neurosurgery. We know the question of endoscopic versus microscopic pituitary surgery. This question has been assessed using 10 meta-analyses, which includes 73 primary studies. This is our own meta-analysis here, which was my master's thesis. Surprisingly, when you look at the studies that are included into these meta-analyses, 32% of them are just labeled as retrospective study. This makes no sense because a retrospective study doesn't tell you what kind of study it actually is. So this is the beginning of the problems. And 50% of them don't even report the study design. So how can you pull things together when you don't even know what you are bringing together? This becomes very challenging. This is one of the most popular meta-analysis published about endoscopic versus microscopic pituitary surgery, and it has been cited about 216 times. But let me tell you something. This is an example of what we call the misuse and misapplication of meta-analysis. In this study, the authors concluded that vascular complication rate is higher in endoscopic compared to the microscopic surgery. But on a closer look, this meta-analysis had about 5,000 patients, okay? About 2,000 in the endoscopic group and 3,000 in the microscopic group. When you calculate the risk of having vascular complication in the endoscopic group is about 0.01. In the microscopic group, it's about 0.05. So from here, if you compute the relative risk, it implies that the endoscopy is 3 times more dangerous in producing vascular complications than the microsurgery. But this is not true. When you look at the studies that were included in this meta-analysis, only 4 of them were analytic studies, that is, studies having a comparison group. 21 of them were descriptive studies. So you cannot take apples and oranges and put them together and you call that a meta-analysis, just as I said before. So if you take out all the descriptive studies that were included into this meta-analysis, and you, without even conducting any statistics, with just visual analysis, you realize that there is no difference in the complication rate, vascular complication rate between endoscopic and microscopic surgery. So therefore, as I always say, only compare comparable things and only combinable things. Be very careful when you read, when you look at a paper. People tell you what they want you to see. Sometimes the truth is hidden somewhere. And when this meta-analysis was published, it anchored a lot of senior neurosurgeons. One of which, Professor Peter, he said, case series analysis, meta-analysis, or no analysis in the evaluation of neurosurgical techniques, you get better or you get out. Okay. And Professor Edward Laws, he wrote, he was some sort of frustrated from this result, and he said, well, eventually with or without the use of meta-analysis or randomized clinical trials, we are still going to be able to evaluate surgical techniques using outcomes, surgical resection rate, endocrine remission, and recurrence. So you see, because a good tool is used in a bad way, it makes people to feel as if it is not actually a very nice tool. So these are guidelines. We fall under the Equator guideline. If you go to the Equator website, you are going to read all about the guidelines for the methodology and reporting of research designs in medicine in general. Okay. So if you look, before you write any study, always try to read about them. Know what is expected from you, what is expected in the methodology, and what is expected in you reporting this study. If you do so, you are going to have very few problems with the reviewers. And again, in one of our papers, we said researchers need better training in methods and terminology, and editors and reviewers, they need to scrutinize manuscripts very, very seriously before they are being published. Okay, like just what I just showed you about the meta-analysis. And the problem with neurosurgeons is that they are always caught in some sort of situation where there's competing priorities between their surgical practice and publishing. They need to publish to advance in their career, but they also need to practice neurosurgery. So they don't have time to get into all these nitty-gritties. So it leads now to all the poor quality studies we're finding in neurosurgery. We already spoke about, we've spoken about the quality of research design in neurosurgery. And I said next week during the WFNS webinar, we are going to talk about problems related to the quantity of research, and we're going to be addressing neurosurgical training in low and medium income countries. This webinar is going to take place next week, and I'm inviting all of you to actually participate in this webinar. And to conclude, I always say research is relevant to neurosurgeons and the neurosurgical trainee. The trainees and the young neurosurgeons should cultivate sound evidence-based practice. Okay, they need to have some basic knowledge about the study designs, biostatistics, and evidence-based neurosurgery. Okay, and neurosurgeons need to come together from low and high income countries to close the gap, research gap between the low and high income countries. I'm from Cameroon. Cameroon is a country found in the armpit of Africa. And at the moment, I'm actually located here, the northern part of Cameroon. It's a population of about 10 million as a single neurosurgeon. This is where I'm actually working in the hospital, but I have an academic position in my hometown in Bamenda, which has a population of about 2 million. So there, I'm also the pioneer neurosurgeon there. So I have a lot of challenges in putting up good neurosurgical units in these two places. I'm sure next year when the African Nations Cup is going to hold here in Garoua, I'm going to have a lot of guys here coming to visit me. I wouldn't have been what I am today if I didn't meet these very nice people. Professor Kazati Kalangu. These are people who need no introduction. Kazati Kalangu, this was in Harare. Professor Deshambenov, in Istanbul. Professor Madi Semi, he did contributed very significantly to my training in neurosurgery. And Professor Robert Dempsey, with whom I spent some time in the United States of America. And I want to also sincerely thank the Egyptian Society of Neurosurgery. I spent about 7.5 years in Cairo, and they were very nice people, and they gave me what I needed to become a good neurosurgeon to practice back in my country. In recent years, I've been working with the Turkish Neurosurgical Society, and we've been developing a lot of things in the education of training of young neurosurgeons. If not of COVID-19, but I've been having international basic neurosurgery course where we included a session for research for young neurosurgeons. So, but we hope that when things get to normalcy, we'll be able to do a lot for young neurosurgeons. Thank you so much.
Great. Ignatius, thank you very much. This was a really nice overview of the various issues. Let me just see if we have any questions that we can take. So, going back to Prof. Giresi's question before, so he mentioned about the need to seek and develop collaborations between centers in low and middle income countries and established academic centers to promote excellence in research. and he cites the example of Roger Hartl collaborating with Tanzania, also Epicare with East Africa. And he makes the comment that this approach needs to be actively promoted, and I fully support this. This is what we've been doing as well with the Global Neurotrauma Research Group in the University of Cambridge. Any comments from Ignatius or Dr. Benzel on this? So the issue of collaboration between centers in LMICs and established academic centers in high-income countries?
I am.
Seems like the question is, or do you have any comments on collaboration between high-income country research centers and then LMIC centers for research, such as Hartl in Tanzania, Pakir in East Africa? Like, how can we establish more of these partnerships?
Well, I have no firsthand experience with this, but I do know that the global neurosurgery movement is looking at things like entities like twinning, combining resources between a program in a high-income country with a program in a low-income country to promote interactions, research, clinical care, visitations. The high-income countries can afford this. The low-income countries can't. So it's, in a way, sort of like a big brother thing, helping those who don't have the resources to help themselves. But I have no firsthand experience, so I can't make an intelligent comment.
Ignatius, do you want to say something?
No, I have no comments.
No, I mean, so I guess, the only thing to say from my point of view is that, and I think, this touches upon the issue of randomized trials as well. So randomized trials are notoriously difficult to conduct in neurosurgery. I think Ignatius touched upon this. But actually they are feasible, and some of the highest quality evidence that we use in guidelines, etc., actually does come from randomized trials. And on the issue of collaboration that Professor Qureshi mentioned, the collaboration that we have set up from the University of Cambridge with various countries in Africa, Asia, and also Latin America has actually been very successful, in the sense that in a recent randomized trial that we just completed, the rescue acute subdural hematoma trial, actually the top recruiting site was from India, Bangalore, and about a third of the patients randomized in that study, and that was actually a really difficult study. So the randomization was happening in the operating theater after evacuating an acute subdural hematoma, because this was a study of craniectomy versus craniotomy. So it's not an easy study to do, but actually the top recruiting site, as I say, was from Bangalore in India, and about a third of all patients were randomized in LMICs. So I think, this shows that this is feasible. The collaborations, they do work, but they do take time to develop. I think these collaborations won't flourish in a few weeks or not even a few months. It does take a long time. But I think I fully agree that this is the way to go. Let me just see if there are any other comments.
Hello, Angelos.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe add that maybe the issue of collaboration between low and high income countries is going to be addressed next week during the Global Neurosurgery webinar. I think there you're going to have some real data to back up what people are saying.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Kazadi Kalango, you're unmuted.
Kalango.
Your question.
Yeah, Professor Kalango has a question.
Yeah, so there is a question from Michael Magoha about the issue of follow-up. So follow-up can be really long-term follow-up, I guess, or follow-up after discharge can be really difficult in LMICs. And yeah, I do think that there's a problem. Any comments from Ignatius or Dr. Benzel?
Yeah.
So that, yeah.
Yeah, I know it is really a very big issue. Follow-up of patients in low-income countries is very difficult. But I think with the new technologies, for example, the phone, what I do particularly, I mean, most of my patients, they have my WhatsApp number. want to keep in touch with them through the phone, because some of them come from very, 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 very far. They need to travel many, many kilometers to get to you. So maybe with the phone, you're able to talk to them and maybe know what is happening. So follow-up must not only be physical. Okay, it can be also, you can use electronic means. So if you put all the resources we have together to follow up our patients, then we're going to have a very low attrition rate.
Well, from my perspective, getting the follow-up and accomplishing that as a research goal really depends on the physician. If you have the resources to do it, like with WhatsApp and maybe various forms of video conferencing, that might be possible. It requires dedication on us, on the physicians, to make it happen. It's not simply going to happen all by itself.
So there are a few comments asking us about putting together a research methods course. And I guess, you know, speaking on behalf of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee, yes, so this is something that this kind of webinars, we're going to try to put together a series of these webinars looking at the research methods in neurosurgery. So this is something that we'll be doing in the next few months. Another thing that we are going to promote through our committee is access to the BMJ, so that's a British Medical Journal, research to publication e-learning program. So this is a fully distance learning program with several modules, which take you from the very basics of how to formulate a research hypothesis up to how to write the protocol for a randomized trial. So, you know, starts from the very basics and goes to the very advanced stages of conducting clinical research. And we are, through one of the next newsletters of the WFNS, we are going to advertise free access for 50 trainees from LMICs to this e-learning program. So keep an eye out on the WFNS newsletter for this opportunity, and also the website of our committee. Any comments on the research training from Dr. Benzel or Ignatius?
Yes, Angelo, I have a comment here. In order to, I am sure there are many people on this conference today who have been motivated and tried to do research, but just simply ran out of energy, ran out of gas, ran out of interest. It requires that the individual who is spearheading the program, the neurosurgeon in this situation, to acquire some sort of resource, whether it's a secretary or a junior resident or medical students, but regardless, a group of people that become hardwired with each other. They develop a community approach to the problem, and they keep each other going. I've seen that in our institution work, and I am sure it can work in LMICs as well. It's just more difficult because we have the resources. We have a secretary who might help, etc., or a research coordinator. LMICs likely do not have that, but it doesn't mean there aren't resources. Like I said, the medical students and residents and others.
Yeah, Professor Benzel, you're perfectly correct. But, you know, as you said, in the low-income countries, we don't have secretaries. The neurosurgeon does everything, you know, from patient preparation, operation, follow-up. So, but for example, what I do is, I consult twice a week, I operate twice a week, and on Fridays, is dedicated to research. So I make sure that by Friday, all my data is entered into my software. So you need to be able to put some resources for your software. It might be just Excel or Microsoft Access, but you need to get something which you collect the data, because without data, you won't be able to say anything. So it's, as you said, it's left for the neurosurgeon to sacrifice time to get data. We have so much data back in Africa, but this data needs to be collected. So you cannot just get it. The filing system is not very good. Using the traditional filing system where a patient comes with a book, and it comes after 1 month or two, it comes with a new book. He can't actually follow up the patient. So you actually need to have electronic filing system. And most, I can assure you that most countries now in Africa are already developing electronic filing systems. We're moving away now from the traditional system to the electronic filing system, and this is going to change a lot of things in the coming years.
Yes. So how many people in LMICs, how many neurosurgeons are working in an institution where there are medical students?
I don't have the figure. For example, in Cameroon, where I am, there are 10 regions. Okay, we have about 6 medical schools, public medical schools, and where I am working, there's a medical school, but the students are able to come to the hospital to do some rotation, but their timing is very limited, so you can't actually use them to collect the data for you. And also, they don't have sufficient knowledge of neurosurgery. I mean, you need to get the data yourself. I mean, evaluating the trauma outcome score, maybe the Glasgow Coma score, and some other skills. It might be difficult for the medical students. So if you don't actually have residents to collect the data for you, it's difficult to use the medical students to do so, because they come to the hospital maybe in the morning, and in the afternoon they need to get back to the faculty to get their lectures. So it becomes difficult. But somehow, if the resources are there, you should be able to maybe hire a secretary, which also incurs some cost.
In the United States, medical students that are interested in neurosurgery are eager to publish, and they are by and large very knowledgeable regarding biostatistics, et cetera. And henceforth, they're very motivated to get several publications so that they can be competitive in getting into a neurosurgery program. I guess I'm asking, and henceforth they become very valuable assets in the clinical research aspect. So my question is can that environment be nurtured, or is it irrelevant in LMICs?
Yes, I think it's possible. It's possible to do that. But as I said, for the moment, this is not what is actually happening. If you look, maybe if you do some sort of a survey to look at how many publications a medical student maybe gets by the end of his or her training in low-income countries, it's not going to be something very significant. So this is not a culture that has been well developed. So maybe we need to inculcate this into our medical training programs.
I know that Salman Sharif in Karachi has worked with students a lot and has been productive in research. But that's my only knowledge of a LMIC relationship like that.
I think we have one more question. So Dr. Kalangu has raised his hand. Dr. Kalangu, do you want to go ahead with your question, please, or comment?
Thank you very much. First of all, congratulations to the organizers and all the people who are on the technical side. And this is wonderful, to exchange ideas from distance, long distance actually, which is very good. It is just a comment I wanted to make for young neurosurgeons. I know they train in centers where everything exists, like secretaries, to get the data and things like that. But I have worked a long time without all those facilities and still managed actually to publish papers. And the idea that to do research you need a lot of money, I'm not totally convinced. I know there is some kind of research where you need a lot of money, but a lot of research can be done with very, very little money. It's just a matter of organizing yourself. Collection of data, for example, when you are doing your word round, I always have some sheet of papers in my pocket so that when I see an interesting patient, I just write immediately into my sheet of paper, and I will put it in a file so that at a certain stage, then I can go and retrieve the data. I can't rely on either students or secretaries because students are busy doing other things, secretaries are not available, and so on. By doing that, I was able to collect a lot of data, and to the point that I could actually publish. I don't want to go into a lot of details here, but it will be interesting when we are discussing about research method and the research itself to young neurosurgeons. I could make a presentation on that, how to do it with nothing, well, nothing, not really nothing, with minimal resources. So that's very, very important. Collaboration with developed centers definitely is very interesting, because you can actually take some blood, for example, where you need to measure some enzymes or so on, but you don't have the capacities or possibilities. Then you can actually join a center which has got those facilities, and then you can collaborate and do that. That's very, very interesting and very possible. So I see that one shouldn't be paralyzed. There is always a possibility. We start by, first of all, solve local problems. Then we start to look now for international problems as well. Again, thank you very much for organizing this wonderful meeting.
Great, thank you, Dr. Kalangu. Yes, I fully agree, and I think this is a very insightful comment. One shouldn't be paralyzed. There is always something that can be done. It might not be, let's say, a randomized trial to begin with, but even collecting data on some interesting case and publishing a small series of patients, I think that this can be done. So we shouldn't be paralyzed. I think that's a very good comment. I mean, on this note, just to end the issue of the medical students working together with residents and neurosurgeons. So let me just briefly show you this. So I don't know if you can see my screen, but this is a paper published in the Lancet only within the last 10 days. And this is looking at something very topical. So this is patients with COVID infection who have had surgery. And what is remarkable is that this is data. So this is a multi-center cohort study from 235 hospitals in 24 countries. And you can see this analysis included data from 1,128 patients who had an operation between January 1st and the 31st of March. So this is really remarkable. And so this is a collaboration of surgeons, residents, and medical students from various hospitals across the world. And you can see the author here. There is a single author, which is the COVID Search Collaborative. Let me just try and see if I can bring this up. So I just want to show you the number of authors on this paper. So you have the single author at the top. Can you still see my screen, my PDF?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm just scrolling down now. No, actually I cannot. It's in the. Anyway, the point that it's not coming up for some reason, but what I'm trying to say is that in this study, thousands of surgeons actually contributed to collecting data, and they're all doing this. And they're all doing this under the umbrella of the COVID Search Collaborative. So when you go into PubMed, and for example, you type then COVID Search, you will see that the PubMed entry, you have the collaborative, and then you have all the collaborators, and you can see all the names then. So these are all the, as I say, surgeons, residents, medical students who have contributed to this project. And I think that this is also really a really powerful way in terms of collecting data and also conducting this kind of big multi-center cohort studies. And this is something that we have done in neurosurgery as well with the GENOS, the Global Neurotrauma Outcome Study, but also with other various studies. So there is the Hydrocephalus Research Network in North America. There are various initiatives like this. So I don't know if Ignatius or Dr. Benzel want to make some comments here.
Yeah, there's Professor Niger from Morocco. Screen. Take off the screen. There's a comment from Professor Niger. So she says there are opportunities for training in her university for young neurosurgeons. So if you need to, if you're interested, you can let me know, then I'll get you connected to her.
What Angelo is talking about is essentially what Ignatius talked about, making lemonade out of lemons. I know the World Spinal Column Society did a email survey and published it regarding COVID-19. And again, these are very low cost. It just requires collaborators putting together a meaningful survey that seems to be valid or has been validated, and then enacted. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to take their time to fill out the survey. And then, voila, you have a paper.
Yeah, exactly. So all of this is feasible. I agree. Okay, I don't think that there are any other questions. Faith, can you say anything that I might have missed? I don't think that I can say anything else.
Dr. Qureshi had a comment that.
Yeah, it was a comment about the collaboration between centers in LMICs and academic.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've already addressed this.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that I can see any other comments. I don't know if we have any closing comments from Ignatius or Dr. Benzel.
Well, this was absolutely fantastic, and on two accounts. Number one, the organization and the way this was put together, and the young neurosurgeons from the WFNS, how effective they and you all have been in moving the needle forward, but just also on a dialogue perspective, and for me, opens my eyes to problems, solutions. This has been very, very, very good from my perspective. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for giving up your valuable time on a Sunday to talk to us. So we really appreciate this.
Yeah, but at least I got a choice as to what time.
Yeah, well, I just want to sincerely thank Professor Benzel for taking off time to be with us. We had a meeting about 2 days ago, and he was really available. And also want to acknowledge Alex and Brandon, who took so much time to prepare the flyers for this meeting, Faith for the good organization, and Angelus for your leadership. Thanks to everyone who participated in this webinar. And in the coming days, we're going to put up a program. So there's going to be a research series with different topics, from case control studies, clinical trials, meta-analysis. So we're going to invite very, very experienced speakers to come and talk to young neurosurgeons.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Ignatius. And also my thanks to Faith as well for, Faith is the secretary of the Young Neurosurgeons Committee, and she's been instrumental in the webinar program of the WFNS YNF. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a good rest of the Sunday, and catch up soon. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Faith, bye.
Bye. Good to see you.
Professor Benzel, bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.